You're listening on Saltwater Radio on Hydropower. We record and create on unceded Galamigin Larrakia country, where stories have been told and passed on for millennia long before introduced prison, police, profits, and plundering of land and sea. We stand solidarity in the ongoing resistance against the settler colonial project here and across the world. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Today, we are really pleased to have a special guest calling in on Indigenous Day as well. Biswash, do you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, namaste, and Zoralang from Indigenous language, that is my Chepang language. So I come from Nepal, and I'm the chairperson of Institute for Indigenous Affairs and Development. Thank you for this opportunity for this platform for me to speak out so that the world can listen our voices from the marginalized communities that is living in the nook and corner of the world. Thank you.
Yes, so when I listened to your testimony at the forum about Indigenous land defender speak out, I found a lot of similarity against extractivist projects in Nepal, in your Chepang people, and also in the so-called occupied Northern Australia, where the Indigenous people have been fighting against different extractive projects from mining all the way to agricultural projects. So I think, yeah, that's why it's really pleased to have you here to share your solidarity and experience of what is the resistance and how we could inspire each other. So again, like this is a show that we could ask each other questions, not just me talking as well. But it would be nice to start from a bit of context of the colonial context of Nepal and from a Chepang experience of how did that happen, not just colonization from a Western sense, which Australia are very familiar with, but more of an internal colonialism and how did that happen? Yeah.
Thank you once again. Let me start. So Nepal was not colonized like the other countries. Nepal was not colonized like by the British, by the other countries like lots of revolutions that occurred before the World War and all other histories. But the history of internal colonization existed in Nepal. So that is through the caste system, that is through the internal system of a dominant group subjugating the minority group in the country. For example, there are different caste and subcaste system in Nepal as well, just like the Hindu system of Brahmin, Khetri, Vaishya, and Shudra. So that was form of colonization, how the lower caste people were dominated, oppressed, and subjugated in different means, whether it be in access to land, whether it be in access to occupation, access to jobs, or any other opportunities in the government or non-government sectors as well. That was how it was existed. So not to talk more broadly on these overall issues, but I just want to focus more on the indigenous peoples issues. So the indigenous peoples in Nepal consist of around 35%, as per the latest data of Nepal's census 2021. So 35% of indigenous peoples are a total population of Nepal, but rest are other. But as per today's Indigenous Peoples Day, one of the speech as well, like we indigenous people are more than 50%, not only 35%. So they says that the data are still missing. And this is also one form of colonization, because when the data are missing, plannings, the policies, those and development agendas will also be missed out, because the overall approach of surveying, carrying out statistical data also tends to miss out the indigenous people's land, their population, because the indigenous people live in more in a difficult geographical region. They live in a more difficult, distant, isolated region as well, and there are still communities who lives in isolated areas as well. So some of those groups are still missed out. So that's this. So the government or the indigenous peoples organizations still claims that we are more than 50% of the total population of Nepal. So the colonial context is, so with these modernizations, we are now colonized in terms of different forms of development agendas as well, in terms of conservation, in terms of these development projects, and also land grabbing and many other things, and also about this just energy transition. Because when the countries are fighting towards to moving towards electric vehicles, they want to reduce the use of carbons and fossil fuels, but the batteries, the raw materials are found in the indigenous sacred land. So who are displaced? The indigenous people, because they want to extract the raw materials. So it is the corporate people who are displacing these people. And regarding the conservation issue, because the government wants to meet the conservation agenda, the government wants to meet the target of sustainable development goals. The government wants to meet the target of United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. The government wants to meet the target of Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, target 3, and there are many other targets as well. So when they want to meet these global agendas, the people are displaced in the name of conservation. There are several cases, several issues that I also have written, but just to take example from the community that I belong. So I belong to Chepang Indigenous community. So the national parks have displaced the indigenous the Chepang and Tharu indigenous people from the national park. So the indigenous means we are connected to the land, the territories, the resources, the soils, the waters, every other the surroundings. But when we are displaced from those lands, then we lose our knowledge, because our knowledge is associated with that jungle, our knowledge is associated with that water, our knowledge is related with that soil. But when we are taken out from that jungle or that territory to the urban area, and in the name of compensation, in the name of conservation, so when they just give a small amount of compensation, and we are moved out to another place, then we lose our knowledge, we lose our relationship with those land, territories, and resources. And regarding the hydropower projects as well, because we live in a difficult geographical region where there are very fast flowing rivers, and the fast flowing rivers are the ones where they can extract hydropower. But these corporate companies, the big government agencies, tends to so they displace the people living in those areas. So it's about the hydropower as well, and there are lots of issues about the development projects, the linear infrastructure projects, about railway constructions, or the roadway constructions, or big mega projects. So these are how the new form of colonization is taking place. It's not like the people fighting and just killing each other like before, but these are the new forms of colonization, and they are colonizing in terms of knowledge as well. The knowledge, the education system that we're getting is more of a dominant approach. So, so these mainstream education is not really taking into account the indigenous knowledge, the local knowledge system that existed. So, so everything that is we're getting is from a dominant perspective, and they don't let us to think critically and express all those opinions. So these are some new forms of colonization that we're facing, and this is how we are still struggling. We're advocating for our rights. We're fighting for our rights, rights for self-determination, rights for self-determined development, rights for self-sustainable determined development, so that we can uh, bring the agenda of development from our own perspective rather than someone imposing those developments into our country.
Mm. That's amazing. I think that touch on a lot of things, especially when we talk about colonial structure, we can't ignore the concept of land. I think like extensively, a lot of your writings touch on the connection to land, being part of the land versus the concept of property. So it would be nice to have a chat about land, like we start from unpacking what land is, from the Chepang experience, but also like how is the current legal framework of the nation state of Nepal treat with indigenous land? Yeah.
Okay, so for us, for the indigenous people, the land is God. Land is everything. In Nepal, in Nepali language, we call it Bhumi. Bhumi is that's a god. So it's not like a monetary relationship. Like this must cost this much, this must cost this land cost this much. But we have a sacred relationship. So we worship land. So the human cycle from the birth to death is all connected with the land and the natural resources. So when we are born, so when so the Chepang community, when there is a newborn baby, so we have a connection with like we got the umbilical cord. Some of them buries got the umbilical cord and they bury in the land so that it is all connected with that. So this is where we come from, and we so that's like connection with the land, and that's how everything is. And even in the death, so we don't. Um, so in Japan community, we don't bury. No, we don't. We don't cremate. We don't burn. We don't use coffins, but we uh, give ourselves, our body to the land. So we bury our body when we die. So this is how we are connected the land, because the knowledge that we gain is also from land, the resources, the foods, the whatever we eat. So those are how everything is connected with land. So for indigenous people, so we do not have more like monetary and other thought process connection with that. So whatever we grow, the knowledge, the resources we possess is all connected with the land. So that's how I wanted to unpack. And regarding the issues of indigenous peoples' possession of the land in Nepal, the struggle that indigenous people are facing is most of the indigenous people do not possess their land ownership certificates. The lands are not in the name of indigenous people. For example, there are other castes, they have registered those lands in their name because there is an official registration process. Okay, this belongs to this. But the indigenous people living in that area, what they thought was, for example, the Chepang community, my father, my grandfather, my grandfather's grandfather thought that this is the land that we own. We grew up here and they spent like hundreds of years in that area. So they thought like, why do we need to register? Because this is where we belong. This is our land, and land belongs to us, and land is us. So that was the thought process. But when they did not register those lands in their own name as the official registration process, then the issue begins. When the hydropower project comes, when the conservation project comes, when the community forest is introduced in that area, that land is not registered in their name. So they will be gradually evicted from that place. They will be moved out from that place. So that's the current issue that the indigenous people are facing in that area.
Yeah. So regarding the naming system, because like when I was talking to these activists in Bali, they also have the Hinduist caste system that links to land ownership, and that rules out like you can only pass on the land to male instead of female. So that is like inherently patriarchal in that sense, and also like very, it just creating a lot of conflicts out of that, and easier for the state to manage the population in relation to the land. So it'd be interesting to like, because you also talk about like how Christianity convert people, if away from the traditional practice, away detaching from the land. But it would be nice to like think more about whether Christianity also contribute to land ownership as well, because it's a big part of Christian missionary that contribute to colonization in other part of the world. Yeah, not just Hinduism.
Yes. The new form of another colonization is the religious colonization. So, because the indigenous people actually mostly does not have their own religion. So we follow animism. So that means we worship natural substance, we worship trees, we worship rivers, we worship the stone. So that's how we are all connected with these resources. So So when there is dominant society of Hinduism, Buddhism, and some other forms of religion that's coming out because there is celebration of festivals, there are some other programs, then we are gradually influenced by the dominant religion. But when most of the community are still struggling to meet the modern agenda, modernization or modern life criteria such as access to education, um, going above the poverty line, because these are all set by the development practitioners, development organizations. But we had a simple life. We depend on the nature, forest. We were eating edible items. We were dependent on the wild roots and all those things. Our forefathers were all existing. They had on their very traditional way of life. So we had nothing to do with carbon footprint. We have nothing to do with the poverty line scale, and we have nothing to do with the urban foods and all. But when there is scarcity, when there is objective scarcity in that area, in that community, then there is some influence of religion. There is influence of Christianity. There is some influence of other development organizations. They come, they try to support, they try to feed you, they try to give you a sack of rice, they give you the utensils, they take your child to educate in the city area, they even give money. So they even give you money monthly as a salary. So when they start giving like this, so people, when the vulnerable people, they don't have anything to say. So they will be happy to accept it. And they will be happy to convert their religion. And although they do not know what that religion, the philosophy is, what they really wanted, what the religion will take them into. So gradually, most of the Chepang community, indigenous Chepang community, not only Chepang, but wherever I'm traveling in Nepal, the indigenous people are converted. They have gradually they are moving out from their own religion, so they are living their own culture. They are living their own practices,
Yeah,
and this is how the colonization of religion is also converting into that.
yeah. Sadly, we could also see it in so-called Australia, where like they have the closer gap plan, basically trying to assimilate people, like get education out of the poverty line, reduce imprisonment, and so on. But at the same time, it's assimilating them to a extractivist lifestyle. A lifestyle that you have to continue to destroy your land, to live, which is not sustainable. But the other thing is like when we talk to land custodians, like indigenous people who still have the practice of hunter-gatherer, they what they call songline. So they have song and knowledge to know like where you could get food by seasonal change. But because of global warming and climate change, a lot of those food sources are gone. So their knowledge of hunter-gatherer cannot be practiced because of that. Is it a similar case in Japan or indigenous communities in Nepal as well?
Yes, a lot. There is lots of erosion of indigenous knowledge. There is lots of erosion of traditional knowledge with this modernization when meeting these conservation agendas. So I think you are familiar with the global indigenous people. The 6.2% of global indigenous people are contributing to 80% of the biodiversity conservation. That means like wherever we find the indigenous people settlement, they are conserving the biodiversity in a very good way, very good manner. So they don't need any project. So it's their traditional lifestyle they are conserving the biodiversity. But although we are conserving the biodiversity, the impacts are faced by indigenous people. The people living in those biodiversity, they are the ones who are evicted, they are the ones who are chased out from that area. So, just to give example of Chepang community, so we practice shifting cultivation, which is also called slash and burn cultivation by most of the people. Most of them understand it as slash and burn cultivation because we burn those grass or the unnecessary weed in that very terrace, very slopy land, and that will be used as a manure. So that will be used as a compost manure. It will be helpful for the production. So, and it is also called shifting cultivation in Bangladesh. In Northeast India, they call it bloom cultivation. So that's a same practice. Uh, every 3 months, no, every 3 years, our family members, our father, they shift from one place to another. So this is one of the very best way of maintaining the soil fertility in that area as well. And this is also one very good way of maintaining the soil erosion. So they control, they practice. These practices are also now. So the recent study carried out by Indigenous Peoples Organization found out that this is the best practice to sequester carbon as well. So the indigenous way, indigenous lifestyle is, so they have very less carbon footprint. But but the urban dominant society, the use of chemicals, the use of chlorofluorocarbons, the use of freeze, the use of air conditioners, this is creating more carbon footprint in the world. So the industrialized society, they are creating more carbon footprints. So, so now, as we are evicted from those lands, we are also now not allowed to practice those shifting cultivation. So that is loss of traditional knowledge, loss of traditional practice. That is also mean that it is loss of traditional livelihood, the livelihood that we used to practice, the way we do farming and fulfill our livelihood, that is now not allowed because there is introduction of community forest, there is encroachment of community forest, and there is some other rules and regulations imposed by the government that we are not allowed to practice and that sort of cultivation in that specific area. And because they call it that needs to be conserved, now we need to shift to a specific place where we can't move, where we can't do the same practice, rotational cropping practice we used to do. So this is how it is eroding our indigenous knowledge, indigenous practices. That is how it is uh, diminishing our traditional practice, traditional livelihood practice as well.
Yeah, so when we talk about eroding, it's not just about prohibition or practice. Sometimes it's also like turning a practice into capital product. And the best example in the Northern Australia, where First Nation people are being offered carbon credits. They're being paid to like do cultural burning, but that has been heavily altered by money funding deadlines and seasons. So if they don't do it, then they don't get paid. So a lot of them are slowly changing and not according to season and traditional knowledge, but based on money and greenwashing for oil and gas companies. Is there like a case in greenwashing and carbon credits in Nepal
A
as
lot, a
well?
lot. So these are the recent projects, the mega project that's coming up is carbon, the greenwashing project. And sadly, the worst part is that indigenous people are not getting anything out of it. And mostly the projects that's coming up is ending up in an administrative cost. So the pennies, the dollars, they don't really go into the community. The benefit sharing plan, the benefit sharing mechanism, access to benefit, access to benefit sharing practices is still very minimal. So we are just a victim. We won't get any compensation, any credit from that. But most of the uh, most of the funds ends up in research, documentation, publication, and use of digital media and all other things. So the community are still the victim.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And a lot of scholars has pointed out how carbon credits is a form of land grabbing, and we see in Tanzania right now. So that's yeah, it's not something. Let's also go into details about the practice. You wrote about Korea farming. Is it? Did I pronounce it right? KHRIYA. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that and how it got prohibited by the state?
Okay, that was what I was calling it as shifting cultivation. So I mentioned that already. So in Nepali, that is Korea, Koria. So that was how what I mentioned just previously about the shifting cultivations and gradually how it is prohibited by the government because of introduction of community forest, the introduction of new the conservation acts, conservation policies, conservation regulations. Because when the indigenous people from that area they do not possess the land ownership certificate, so that land belongs to the government. So the government tries to push away the people from that land because they don't have the official document. And those shifting cultivation, which I call Korea in Chepang language, in Nepali language, so they are not allowed to practice those shifting cultivation, and so that's how it is prohibited.
Thanks for clarifying that. I also want to ask about like the some extractive project you mentioned, like such as how communities got displaced by lime and iron extraction, but especially I think you wrote about how a cement company trying to fake signatures. Do you want to talk about how does that play a role into the free, prior, and informed consent and how the consent is being manufactured?
Thank you so much for reading all of my articles. So now you're familiar with whatever I had written already. So it's more about justifying as well. Now, yes. So with this modern world, modernization, people are looking, they're running after money only. So the one of the easiest way to earn money is now from the extraction of the natural resources, such as sand or such as limestone, such as these mining companies are growing very fast. They are the ones who grow very fast these days. They earn very fast. They earn profit a lot. So the case of Chepang, I think I was reading one of the National Human Rights Report as well, National Human Rights Commission report, and I was sharing the same case to the land rights defender uh, organization on Friday. So I was in that call. So around 1,000 some households will be directly or indirectly impacted in 4 different districts: Chitwan, Mokanpur, Gorkha, and Dhading district of Nepal. These construction companies, these limestone, these mining companies are entering these lands because these are the sacred triangle land which is fresh and virgin land where uh, there is no where boring, there is no extraction of any other resources. So they found those areas and they found those resources. Now these companies are paying very minimal amount, and those indigenous people are displaced from those areas, although they do not want to go away from that land. What the company says is that so this land is not officially yours. So this does not really officially belong to you because you do not have the documents. So they don't have options. So they just get few money, very minimal amount, and they are forced to move away. And there was also a case of fake signature. That our community, because the community we are still struggling to get educated, they can't do any signatures at all. So there was one news saying that one of our Chepang family member was uh, fake signature was done by those companies to get the approval from the government. So this is how the big corporations, big corporate companies are invading or like we can call it violating the human rights because the right to free prior from consent is our fundamental rights for whoever development project or the government or any other wants to do any activity in the indigenous land. Epic free prior from consent is mandatory, but they look at the fifth signature that was being carried out in one of those areas. So that's how it is going. Because and those corporate companies, they are not punished because they can influence the government, they can influence the policies, they can influence the lawmakers. So it's the victim is indigenous people. For example, although I'm talking like this aggressively, I want to let the whole world know the what the case is really going. Yeah, but although I talk, but we can't influence, and we still remain subjugated, and we still are oppressed. And by this structure.
It's all right. Our audience share the anger because we give away natural gas to East Asia for free and
Yeah,
they resell them. So I think a
yeah.
lot of people resonate with all these extractive projects that only benefits the few elites who hold wealth. um,
Mm.
I think it'll be interesting to touch on because when I talk to the Adivasi people in India, South India, in the Jharkhand state, the Orient tribe, and they were also
Mhm.
talking about like the history of resistance against extractive projects, especially when we know about the Naxalites, the Maoist insurgency, but also the Pathigali movement where the indigenous people trying to set up stone to like declare territory so that the mining company can say like, all right, this is not undocumented. So has there been any like resistant movement like this in the indigenous community to fight against or trying to like adapt to what the state claim as ownership of land and so on?
Mhm. Thank you. The Supreme Court of Nepal has given a decision order to mandatorily carry out free prior consent uh, and take it strongly, uh, uh, implement those ILO 169 conventions as mentioned, is ratified by the government. So, although the Supreme Court has already given order, uh, the government is still struggling. That is one. That because indigenous people had resisted, and we are continuously advocating and raising these issues on the FA because there were just fake FA and the consent is just for the formality. So the Supreme Court had a given good order on that, and the indigenous people organizations, we are collectively demanding for self-autonomous regions, autonomous region for the indigenous people, because that will be the land where we can practice our customary governance system. That will be the land where we can make our own decision, not influenced by the government authorities, not influenced by the other social structures or the government structures. So we are demanding for that self-autonomous territory, that region, so that we can practice our own laws and practices. Uh, One indigenous community in Nepal, Baram Indigenous Community, has got that the Supreme Court has given order to fully function that self-autonomous region, um, th- so that so the political, the administrative, their customary law can be practiced in that area. So that is one the impact of resistance that indigenous people have achieved, and and there are lots of movements, there are lots of strikes, there are lots of protests that indigenous people are demanding. And few achievement is that there is some quota system, a quota system to get the government job for the indigenous people. But the problem is the categories within indigenous people is very vast. Within indigenous people, some are very rich, they are affluent, they have access to everything. But there are indigenous people who do not have anything, who are still shifting from one place to another. So there are around 200 some indigenous individuals in Nepal who are still moving from one place to another. When someone dies in that 200 population, they move to another place. They keep moving. So they do not possess anything. They keep moving nearby forests, nearby the rivers. So the quota system, the that we have demanded is still a problematic because some groups of people need more focus, and the other achievements that we have achieved through some of the resistance or some of those advocacies. The endangered group has achieved the endangered group receives some amount of allowance every month. So each member of family are entitled to get some amount as a social protection or allowances. So they receive without any strings attached. So they don't have to do anything. They just receive money. That's a cash transfer. These are few initiatives, and but the indigenous people are taken as vote bank. As vote bank, They try to insert these few things that so that they can touch the indigenous people's heart and they want to get more votes. Uh, these are few initiatives, and there are people in the government level. There is Indigenous Nationalities Commission in Nepal, so that's the highest wing for indigenous people to uh, take, monitor all those anything government activities that is being implemented with the indigenous people. They are the ones to recommend. There is another government entity that is established as per the Constitutional Act of 2002, which is called National Foundation for Development of Indigenous Nationalities, which is also called FDIN. So that's also a government wing, which is operating, which tries to document, which tries to research, but that is not fully working. That is not really fully functional. It is not working as per its mandates. And there is umbrella organization of entire indigenous nationalities who are trying to bring up those issues, but they are now politically segregated. They are all divided by political opinion, so they can't work really collectively. These are few things that's coming up, and there are tensions within those.
That's a lot to touch on because all this initiative, like
Yes.
it will always create friction. Like for example, in so-called Australia, they create land councils to manage land rights for indigenous people, but at the same time they also manage royalty for mining company as well. So that actually creates a lot of friction in community because some family get money and some family doesn't. And we call it divide and conquer tactics because that basically trying to have a council structure, and then you control a small group of people and trying to make them believe they're doing good for community, which they are, but at the same time, within a colonial structure, you're still informing a colonial violence into your people. So it's very tricky situation.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so I think in terms of like when we so I always like reference from this article by a Amazonian indigenous writer Linda Kubik. So she wrote about how do the people that fight against global capital, and they said like if we want to fight it, we have to understand like colonialism is not a nation state anymore, it's corporation. And if we want to like remove it, we have to starve the system. So that links a lot into the movement of BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction. So that they use it in so basically it's like they use a lot in Palestine and Israel relationship, especially when oh this company is supporting Israel, then we'll try to reduce our money flow into this company. So that's a very simple tactics, and they start using that in West Papua as well because West Papua is being colonized by Indonesia, where they were having 2 million hectares of land cleared for sugar plantation, and and now they're launching like BDS movement of like, oh, this chocolate company is supporting the sugar plantation. So I'm wondering if there's any initiative that targeting where the concrete is selling to, the limestone is selling to to say like, all right, we have to get international alliance to like collectively boycott this company because they're destroying the stewardship that of the people that
Yes.
manage 80% of the land mass. So yeah,
Yes,
that's
yes.
just curious, tactic wise. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those examples from different other countries. And there are some achievements from of land back movements in some other countries, whether in New Zealand or Brazil. I read some news about that. So the current tension is still in Nepal is here the still lacking issue is the when people talk about indigenous people, they just talk about the people in authority. They just talk about the culture, the language only. So it's not only about that. So we need the land. We need those self-autonomous region. We need it's about the connections with the land, the knowledge, to the resources we possess. So it should be whom we should belong to. So that is still missing, and we do not have that specific achievements like getting land back and some other things. Um, we do not have those examples, but it's the other way that the government is taking all those things. That's the recent cases. But few things that is we are trying to achieve is through those alliance that you mentioned. So we're trying to work with some alliance of search coalition that works with the mining and extractive industries. They're trying to raise these issues in UN platform forums as well. So the indigenous peoples organizations representatives are attending UN conferences. They're attending special rapporteur programs of indigenous people in that area in UN programs of Switzerland. But still the achievement is very less. Our voices are still less heard because there are many issues of hydropower displacement that's still coming up, and our colleague Sabnam Lama is also sharing those issues in the bigger platform, but achievement is still very low.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about UN because I remember one of your last question in your podcast. You talk about the America influence in the international community and UN, as we see, they have the veto power
Yes,
and like how do we get past that? Because I think when we talk about UN, we always talk about nation state, but we don't talk about smaller indigenous nation having that diplomatic relationship with other indigenous nations overseas. And I think that's an interesting part of how, because a lot of First Nation scholars, like indigenous scholars in here, they think about that, but it's like it's very hard to connect when everyone have that UN bureaucratic mountain to climb through.
yeah,
So yeah, I think that's an interesting part, and especially like when we think about the reason we call it the Gen Z revolution in Nepal, like last
yes,
year,
yes, yeah, yeah,
everyone has to be like linked to the color revolution.
yes,
I don't know whether it's true because I'm not Nepalese, but we know there's big influence everywhere, through those
yeah,
network, and especially
yeah,
they would target indigenous community as well because they control the land. And land is vital for any military and extractivist interests for the American
yeah,
empire to survive.
yeah,
So yeah, I think it's a valid question of seeing how we could respond to US imperialism, like collectively in the global context, which is very hard. I don't have to answer.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's challenging.
Yeah. You also asked about AI. Like,
Mhm.
do you change your view now, like about how you see AI? Because that's also vital to the neo-colonial tools of how all this data and statistics being absorbed into the military industrial complex that feed into extraction again. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what I mentioned in a few other podcasts, but the AI is taking the entire world. The jobs will be taken away. I'm sure about that. The jobs will be taken away. But the data of indigenous people, the indigenous knowledge, few organizations are trying to collect the indigenous knowledge, indigenous practices, and these data will also be taken away. Uh, they'll be taken away, and I don't know how it will be used by AI.
Are
So
you involved with any indigenous data sovereignty project, which I think is bullshit for me.
not now, not now.
Yeah.
No, the good part is the knowledge needs to be documented, that needs to be archived, because that will also be useful for the future generation, our son, our daughter, our offspring can have those access to those knowledge and practices. But I don't know how it will be used, how it will be uh, the copyright, whom does the copyright belong to? Does it have patent rights as well? So those things also needs to be considered. The genetic resources,
Yeah.
the knowledge of genetic resources of indigenous people, knowledge that needs to also be confirmed, like how it will be used. because there are big organizations called World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. They are working on this documentation. Let's see how things will go, but so this has both the pros and cons.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is, to maintain data centers and the infrastructure of IT, you need a lot of extractions, and that
Yes,
is,
yes.
yeah, I think that's a tricky part of, it feels like you're bribing some indigenous people to kill another indigenous tribe because and the land being yeah, extracted in that way. Okay, I think we touch on a lot of things. I think the final question in my mind, I want to get it out, is the IMF and how it. I'm not sure how familiar you could say, like, I don't want to answer this because, but a case of IMF and its relationship to aid in Nepal, and does that intersect with indigenous communities? Because we know a lot of IMF aid, for example, like money-wise, is a form of control, and that dictates how a nation state function and how do they want to drive the policies, and a lot of them will be, the suffer will always fall back to indigenous people. So that's why I'm curious to see if you have any knowledge about IMF.
Thank you. I do not have a specific experience of working with IMF. I do not have any specific examples that I can share about IMF working in our sector. But what I would say is most of the development agencies, most of the big organizations, they influence their interest rather than working on the indigenous people's interest. The self-determined development of indigenous people is not really taken into account, but the interest of the bigger corporates, the bigger companies, the UN organizations, that will play a major role. For example, some are influenced by missionary, some are influenced by just conservation lands, some are influenced by agriculture. So they have their own vested interest. So they really do not take into the worldview of indigenous peoples. What really they want is not really taken into account. That's why the project fails. That was what I was just discussing with one of the colleagues in the indigenous peoples day as well. So he was mentioning, oh, we have worked with Chepang family. And I openly told him that that is why we were still struggling because they did not really bring really development. They did not really reach out to the grassroots level. They did not really bring what we really wanted. So that was all top down. That was all what they wanted to inject. That was what really they just wanted to finish the budget on it. So, but that was not about what the people living in that area, what was their culture, what is their attachment to the livelihood, how those ground level, the soils, the livelihood, those things can be corrected. But that was not really taken into account. So when it is about a top-down approach, when it is about just finishing the activities prepared in the Excel sheet, so that's all how it hovers around. The budget finishes, the people get salary, but we remain as it is.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. Last thing, I actually also want to congratulate on the new Indigenous Knowledge Centre, like coming out. Would you like to share to the audience about that as well?
Yes, I would love to because we have recently started Indigenous Knowledge Center, Chepang Indigenous Knowledge Center. That will be a space for the researchers. That will be a space for the students to come and carry out research. That will be a space for the people within that area to transfer the knowledge, the elders, the knowledge holders, the shamans, the knowledge leaders, the indigenous leaders will come to that space. They will be sharing the indigenous, the practices, customary laws, the customary governance system that they used to do. And we, all the community people will gather. I will be recording, I'll be transcribing, and we'll be making a book out of it. So that will be a knowledge center. We will try to decorate everything with the knowledge with the indigenous lifestyle, life ways that we are adapting to. Um, so that will be a place. We will also be carrying out indigenous research methods camp as well. The people can experience the tribal camping as well. We'll be taking students of bachelor's, undergraduates, and master degree students to that village, to that specific remote area. They will be experiencing a 1 week camping, experiencing an indigenous lifestyle. So we'll be documenting everything. We'll be documenting indigenous knowledge. We will also work on promoting indigenous enterprises because it should be about indigenous enterprises. So it's not only about feeding them. It should be promoting indigenous enterprises where we can develop our own knowledge as well. So we will work on all these. We will document the shamanic practice, the mantras, every words that they preach. So we will document all of those. So that will be a space to practice customary governance system as well. We will try to bring most of out of it, and we'll document all of those things.
That's amazing. I
Uh-huh.
hope like more people know about this. And also like, very curious as well because you have like all these people who don't understand, lacking concept of land,
Yes.
and they come to the center. How do you design like to have them decolonize their mind about the land? I think that would be really curious to know because I don't know how. Yeah.
So, so our knowledge center, Indigenous Knowledge Center, will be a living museum. Uh, we will let them go around, stay without any judgment or anything. So we will let them feel. We will let them touch those lands, the forest, the resources. We'll let them go to the jungle. So we will do a very basic things, but that would let them internalize the real practices of indigenous Chepang people living in those areas. Uh, so when they stay in that land, I think they will feel it. But I don't know. It might be difficult, but let's see how I deconstruct or decolonize their mindset of the concept of land and all the other things. But we will try.
Hopefully I could convince someone that to support that and
Sure,
experience
yes.
it
You're
myself.
welcome. Yeah.
Is there any questions for me as well?
Thank you so much. You gave me examples from some other countries and practicing the best practices of indigenous peoples, policy-wise, practice-wise, or any other things. That was very helpful for me to rethink as well. Let's see how it goes. But thank you for this opportunity for me to speak out. Let's see uh, how people will respond to it as well. And happy to connect, happy to collaborate in the coming future.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone would like to collaborate, please reach out. We are on Instagram as
Yeah.
well.
Yes.
Um, so thank you again for your generosity, for your knowledge and time.
Uh-huh.
And I hope
Thank
you
you
have
so
the
much.
Indigenous Day.
Happy Business Day.
Yeah. All right, cool. Okay.
Thank you.
See you
Okay.
around. Namaste.
Thank you so much. Namaste.